As you all well know, I'm a big fan of Twisted Metal, so it should come to no surprise when I say I also enjoy the video game Vigilante 8. And why? Because it's the only other car combat game that is almost as good as Twisted Metal. Of course, Twisted Metal, as we all know, will always be number one. Anyway, when I found out that they were doing a remake of the original Vigilante 8, I was excited. However, the more I learned about the new one, I started to become unsure if this new remake would be better than the original. So today I'm going to do a rant on the new Vigilante 8. Now I know what you're thinking. Winnebago, how can you do a rant on the new one if you haven't even played it? Because we know you do not have a next generation console. Now, true, I can't talk about the gameplay, how the cars control, or the weapon system. But you know what I can rant about? What I know, what I've read on the internet, what I've seen in pictures, and videos I have watched on YouTube. That much I can talk about. First off, I want to talk about the cars in the remake, starting with the ones they got right. Let's see. Sid, Dave, and Beeswax are all looking pretty awesome, and very accurate to the original design. Johnny Torque is now driving a 2-door instead of a 4-door, but it still looks pretty close to the original. The gremlin that Boogie drives looks a little boxy, but close enough, although I have to admit the air intake does seem like a bit much. Next up, we have Chassis Blue. Unlike in the original game, she is no longer driving a car based off the Shelby Cobra, but instead a new one based off the Challenger or possibly a Barracuda. Now, normally a major change like this might piss me off, however, it does not, and for two reasons. First off, this new car is more reminiscent of the 1970s era. I really can't say that a Cobra makes me think of the 1970s. Secondly, the Piranha, as it's called in the game, is actually a car that never made it into the original Vigilante 8. This car, well, actually all the cars from Vigilante 8, come from another game called Interstate 76. It was supposed to be a tie-in, but it never happened. And finally, we have Molo. Now, I know a lot of people were probably very pissed off that the school bus no longer makes an appearance in the game, but they kinda have a good reason. You see, back when they were making Vigilante 8 the second offense is when the Columbine shooting occurred. And many people began pointing fingers at Vigilante 8, saying that by having a school bus in a game about auto combat would encourage kids to promote violence against school buses. And that's why they changed it to a prison bus. Now, even though a lot of time has passed, the people who made the game are still too afraid to even use the school bus. In fact, I read somewhere that it is forbidden for them to even use it. Now, a lot of people might say they're being pussies and scaredy cats. But you know what? I don't blame them. Especially with all the crazy people who make a big deal about video games. Although, my complaint is, if they are going to base it off the prison bus, shouldn't it have two back axles like the original one? Anyway, those are the cars they got right. Now let's take a look at the cars they got wrong. First off, let's take a look at Convoy. Now, for the most part, I have to admit I do like the design. However, it doesn't even come close to the original. First off, the original does not have 3 axles. Second, it doesn't even have a sleeper. Actually, the more I look at it, it seems to resemble the truck from the second game, Second Offense, which would have been fine if this was a remake of the sequel. But it's not. Honestly, how hard would it be to recreate the original? Next up, we have Houston, driving a vehicle I know came from the second game, the tow truck, or as it's been renamed in the remake, the Towmaster. So what's the problem here? In the original game, Houston drove a big-ass muscle car called the Palomino, which of course is a big spoof on the Mustang. And it was badass. And it definitely reminded you that you were playing a game based in the 1970s. Because let's face it, the 1970s were known for two things: muscle cars and disco. The tow truck, on the other hand, could be from any decade. It's not very reminiscent of the 1970s. Secondly, the tow truck didn't appear until the second game when Houston was no longer a cyborg. Oh, I guess I should point out that she's a normal person in the remake as well. And that's the problem. By having this vehicle in the original, you're rewriting the history of the game. Actually, by doing that, this feels more like a retrocon than a remake. Next up, we have Sheila. In the original, Sheila drove a car called the Strider, which was heavily reminiscent of the Myers Manx. Now, in the remake, her car is still called the Strider. However, the vehicle she is driving is the Wunderwagen. From Vigilante 8, the second offense. So, what's the problem here, you ask? Well, first off, changing the name is completely stupid! I mean, in the second game, it was called the Wunderwagen, a very clever spoof on the name Volkswagen. The point is, if you're gonna use the car from the second game, there's no reason to change the name. Secondly, does this mean that if they make a remake of the sequel, that they're gonna use the Strider, but they're gonna call it the Wunderwagen? It's just stupid! And secondly, VW Beetles are overrated. I mean, they're in so many games as it is. This brings me to the last car I'm going to talk about, Loki. In the original, Loki drove your run-of-the-mill generic army jeep, and for the most part, it was okay. But for the remake, they thought the jeep was too small, and wanted to give him a more bigger vehicle to drive. Well, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So, what's he going to drive? Why, he's going to drive a six-wheeled army tank concept from the 1940s. Oh my god. Where do I begin on this? First off, this does not fit the time period or the setting that the game takes place in, which would be 1970s America. No, this would be more fitting for 1980s Russia. Now, to be fair, these vehicles were developed in the 1940s. But regardless, not many people are aware of that fact. On top of that, many people don't associate six-wheeled tanks with the 1970s. That's more of a 1980s kind of thing. If you ask me, they should have used the Goliath half-track. Sure, that comes from the second game, but that made a hell of a lot more sense. And secondly, do I even have to say it? Do you even want me to say it? It looks like you're ripping off Minion from Twisted Metal. Another problem I have with this game, just by looking at it, is the car deformation, or how your car looks like as it receives damage. Now, usually in most games when a car receives damage, it turns into a massive heap of twisted metal. But no, not in Vigilante 8 the remake. Instead, it looks like your car got sent to the chop shop, as pieces will just fall off. They don't bend, they don't buckle, they don't even dent. There's not even any goddamn bullet holes in them. All the car panels, well except for the doors, will just fall off until you're driving nothing but a bare-bones skeleton of a car. In the real world, that's not how things work. In the real world, sheet metal gets bent and twisted, and on top of that, it doesn't all fall off. Honestly, would it have killed them to put some goddamn realism into the car deformation? Anyway, the last thing I'm going to talk about for now are the characters. For the most part, the characters look fine. Except for two. Loki and Dave. First off, Loki. In the first game, Loki was a United States fighter pilot. Here, he doesn't look like a fighter pilot. In fact, he don't even look very American to me. I think the person who got it the worst, though, had to be Dave. Originally, Dave was a hippie. But I take one look at him and I say, Dave, you are not a hippie.
You are a pirate. You're our favorite indeed. Being a pirate is a right to do. Do what you want, cause a pirate is free. You are a pirate. You are a pirate.
Well, either that or a biker. But you're definitely not a hippie. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the game. For now, anyway. Now, does this mean I think the game's bad? No. I'm pretty sure the game is fun and enjoyable. But based on what I've seen, I just think they've made the wrong choices. That's all.
You are a pirate.
What in the world is that supposed to mean?